morning. I welcome you all for this morning session for EAC Foundation course. Now we had been doing these foundation courses for graduates since last 2 to 3 weeks. We have finished the portion for aptitude. Now from today onwards I'm going to talk about the verbal ability, but before we speak about verbal ability, it's very important for you to understand the communication aspect itself. So today and tomorrow I'm going to talk about the communication aspect just to give you the foundation for it before we head on to the vocabulary part, where you will understand certain elements which will help you answer questions in terms of verbal ability. Now when we talk about verbal ability, it's imperative, it's important that you understand the foundation in terms of vocabulary. Now when we speak about vocabulary, it's one of the 4 fundamental pillars of communication. Now when I say fundamental pillars of communication, I am referring to the oral communication. Now the question would be, what is oral communication? Is it verbal or non-verbal communication? So we have to take few steps back to understand the foundation. That's why in next few sessions I'm going to talk about the foundation, the fundamentals of communication skills. Then I will move on to the verbal ability part. So we often tell each other, or we make this observation and comment that the communication skill is very important if you want to succeed in life. Now what do we exactly mean by communication skill? So communication skills is, or rather communication, so how would you define that? So whenever 2 individuals are getting into a conversation, there are 2 people talking, it could be face-to-face communication, it could be a written communication. What exactly happening is there is an exchange of information, there is a transmission of data. What you see here is that 2 individuals, there is transmission of data happening, and the transmission of information happening and exchange of data. Alright. Now if we go further, now we need to understand what is a communication cycle, and I have mentioned this as a myth. What do we mean by myth? Myth is something that you think it is right, but actually it's not. The reason you think it's right because this is how you have been trained and this is how you have been taught. So when we talk about communication cycle, we have learned in our school that there is a sender and there is a message, or there is an information, there is a message, and there is a sender who's sending this information, right? Now there has to be a receiver. Now once the receiver receives the message, he sends a feedback. Now think about this aspect. Is the feedback always necessary? So if we look at an example of a billboard or a hoarding or a newspaper, or if we have a news for that matter, if we are watching news, we are receiving an information, right? But we are not sending any information back, which means this feedback is always not necessary. But in our school, we were taught that this feedback is essential. The feedback, if it's missing, then the cycle is not complete. Now this is wrong. There is no such thing that in case there is no feedback, the cycle is incomplete. It doesn't really hold water. Now what do I mean by that? I showed you some examples like the hoarding. Say for example, you're walking by the road and there is a hoarding which says sale, 50% sale or 70% sale in Big Bazaar. Either you go and buy or you don't buy, but you have received the information, correct? If you're reading something in a newspaper, you have received the information, you are watching news, you see the newsreader say something and you receive the information, but you are not sending any message back, you are not sending any feedback, but still the communication is happening, you are aware of it. That's why we say that the feedback is not necessary, and hence that's a myth. Now we need to know what are the essentials of effective communication. We always use the word the communication is not effective, the communication is not good. There are certain essentials which is very key for an effective communication. Now there are 6 essentials of effective communication. These are assertiveness, authenticity, open-mindedness, empathy, clarity, and listening skills. Now let's understand one by one what do we mean by this. Assertiveness basically means your ability to say no to a person or decline something without offending a person. Say for example, if somebody comes and asks me for some money, I can either say no, I will not give it to you, or I say fine, I will give it to you. Now this is an essential aspect of a human behavior. In order to understand that, we need to look at three important elements. Let me quickly make a note of this here so that you understand what do I mean by this. So three important elements. I'll first type it, then I will zoom it so that you can see it clearly. Okay, so it is aggressive, submissive, assertive. Now what do I mean by aggressive? Aggressive basically means where you are showing force, you are showing aggression, you are being harsh, or that is basically called aggressive. For example, if somebody is asking for 100 rupees and I say sorry, I'm not going to give it to you, I'm not using the word sorry and I'm being very violent in terms of my body language, or it could be in terms of the words that I'm using. I'm being harsh, I'm being rude. Now that's an aggressive behavior. Submissive means the moment the person is asking, I'm taking money out and giving to that person. I'm not even contesting, I'm not even protesting, which means whatever the other person asks, I submit myself to that person. I don't exercise any kind of restraint. Assertive basically means your ability to say no to a person without harming that person, without making that person feel bad. Okay. Now, when we talk about effective communication, it's very important that our communication is assertive in the sense we use words, we use a language, we use vocabulary that is considered more polite. At the same time, you stand your ground. You don't really submit yourself, and you still stand your ground. Say for example, when the moment the person is asking for money and I say that I'm sorry, I just have 100 rupees and I have saved this money for my lunch. If I give it to you, I will have to go hungry. So that's why I request you not to ask for money. Now I'm explaining the situation and then I'm saying no to that person. When we talk about aggressive behavior, I don't give any explanation whatsoever. I simply say no. When I say submissive behavior, I don't look into what my issues are or my limitations or problems are. I immediately accept what the other person is saying. So that's a submissive behavior. Now, essentials of effective communication, like I said, is assertiveness, because it allows you to make your point without hurting the other person's feelings. That's why it's an essential. The second point is authenticity. Authenticity basically means whatever you say, you build an element of trust, the other person believes in you. Now, when we talk about authenticity, we basically mean when you are speaking to a person, whatever the person says, you end up finding a lot of truth in it, you believe in it, and it helps you build trust. You must have come across a lot of people that you cannot trust because whatever they say is actually not true. What happens in a situation like that is the element of trust recedes, it falls. Now that I'm saying that it's an essential of effective communication, whatever you are saying has to hold water, has to mean the truth. Otherwise, you will lose the trust from the other person, and hence that's an essential aspect of effective communication. The third point is open-mindedness. Now, what do we mean by open-mindedness? Let me show you an example. Okay. All right. Now, let me type in something here. Child labor. Okay. Now, if you go for an interview and the interviewer asks you a question that do you support child labor? Now, 99% of the answers would be no, I do not support child labor. But what if the other person, the interviewer, says that I'm sorry, you don't support child labor, but I do support child labor, because the fundamental definition of child labor in India is incorrect. That needs to be amended, that needs to be changed. Now, are you allowing that other person to express a difference of opinion? That is what open-mindedness is. Open-mindedness is opposite of closed-mindedness, where you build certain assumptions, where you build certain perceptions, and you don't allow anybody to tamper with it, you don't allow anybody to change that. When we speak about effective communication, it's imperative that you allow the other person to express their opinion with an open mind. It's always welcome to allow somebody else to speak about what's in their mind without harming that person or without disagreeing with that person in the very beginning. Two different individuals will definitely have two different opinions, but you should always allow the opinion to be expressed. Look at it from the other way around, or from the other side. If there's a group of people who are talking to you and they have a certain way of looking at something and you have a different opinion, you definitely want your opinion to be heard. It may not be accepted, but you definitely want that opinion to be given some consideration, that why are you making such an opinion. That's why it's important that we understand that open-mindedness is an important element of essentials of communication. The fourth point is empathy. Now, there is another word which is called sympathy, but I am not talking about sympathy here, I am talking about empathy. In order to understand what is empathy, I need to show you an example to demonstrate what do I mean by this. Okay. So, I am going to write a sentence here. Okay. The first one is I am sorry. The second one is I apologize. Now, the question here is there a difference between these two sentences or these two words? Okay. So, I am sorry, the key word here is sorry in this case. Let me mark it. And in this case it is I apologize. Is there a fundamental difference between these two words? Okay. Now, since we have this mode of communication through television, so obviously I can't hear what you're saying and there is no way you can express your opinion here. But I would like you to think and understand what exactly do I mean by this. Number one is I am sorry. Number two is I apologize. Is there a difference? Your answer could be yes, there is a difference. Now, if there is a difference, you need to think what the difference is. If you think there is no difference, then obviously there are no further questions to that, right? So, if you think there is a difference between sorry and apology, what exactly is that? Okay. So, before I go ahead, I want to tell you what exactly I mean by this. Now, there are two more words. Sympathy versus empathy, right? Now, when we talk about sympathy, I'm just going to write it here. Sympathy is only an expression, and when we talk about empathy, it's an action. Okay. So, I can write expression here to make it easy for you. All right. So, sympathy is just an expression, empathy is an action. What do I mean by this? To display or to explain that, I need to give you a couple of more examples. I'm going to write, I'm going to give you a situation and then I'm going to write the sentence. Okay. The first one is you're talking to a person who says he lost his car. The second one is you're talking to a person who says he who lost his mobile phone. Okay. Now, in a situation like this, just pay attention what I'm trying to say. In a situation like this, now the first one is a stranger, the second one is a friend. You know the second person, but you essentially don't know the first person, right? If your statement is I apologize for your loss, or the second one is I'm sorry to hear about your loss. Okay. Now, the point to be noted is the moment you say I apologize for your loss, that means you are responsible for it. So let me change the color. The moment you say you are sorry, you apologize for the loss, that means you are responsible for it. The moment you say I'm sorry to hear about your loss, you're not saying I apologize, you're saying sorry. That means you are not responsible. Okay. So that's exactly what sympathy and empathy is. Sympathy means sorry, empathy means I apologize. Sympathy is just an expression of convenience. For example, if you're talking to Vodafone or Airtel or Reliance Jio and something is not right with your mobile network, and the customer service representative always says, I apologize for the inconvenience. What does that mean? It means let me find out what is wrong and let me fix the problem. That is what the word apology is. You will use the word apology when you are directly or indirectly responsible for anything that is wrong. You will use the word sorry when you are not or nowhere concerned in terms of the responsibility or being the reason for anything going wrong. It's just an expression of consoling someone. Sorry is an expression of sympathy. Apologize is an expression of empathy. So when we talk about essentials of communication, we say that you should have empathy. It basically means your words should translate into action. You should not say things just for the heck of it, just for the sake of it. You need to use these words which can also have a following action to bring a change, to make a difference, or to find a solution. The problem is we usually argue with people, we only focus on the problem, but we don't think about the solution. When we talk about the essentials of communication, empathy basically means it's a solution oriented communication, not a problem focused communication. All right. So that is what empathy is all about. The fifth one is clarity. Now what do we mean by clarity? Now I'm going to showcase a couple of more examples here. Now clarity, it can be denoted in two ways, in terms of speech or in terms of thought. Okay. Now when I say in terms of speech, it means the way we speak. Okay. Now in terms of thought, the way we listen. Now I'm going to give you an example. Now when we say essentials of communication, this clarity is extremely important. Okay. In terms of thought, the way we listen, I'm going to talk about that in detail when we speak about listening skills. But here I'm going to talk specific to the speech part. Let me show you a number. Okay. Now this is 5. How do I pronounce this? Or how do I write it? I just say F-I-V-E, 5, right? The second one is this, and the third one is all right. Now pay attention here. The first word what you saw a while ago is 5. All right. Now the pronunciation is 5, F-I-V-E, 5. So I need to bite my lower lip to end the word. It's 5. The second one is 11. So it starts with A, le, ven, 11. And the third one is 12. Like how I ended the number 5 in terms of pronunciation, I do the same with 12 as well. Now problem that happens among people, I will explain where the issue is. Okay. The pronunciation here, I hope this is visible to all of you. Yes. The pronunciation here, if I may put it in terms of phonetics or easily understandable, it's 5, correct? 5, but lot of us pronounce that as 5. Instead of saying 5, lot of us mispronounce this as 5. This mispronunciation can lead to misunderstanding, especially when you're speaking to someone on a phone. Now imagine you're speaking to someone on a international call, if you're working in an organization, and usually the connections are sometimes not so good. So when you're making these pronunciations, when you're saying these words, it can lead to misunderstanding. The second one here is 11. So I can pronounce this as a, le, ven, but lot of people pronounce this as 11, right? Now that's a mispronunciation. This is where they go wrong. Then you have 12. It's 12. This is how it's pronounced, but we make mistake. We just say 12. Okay. Now this is exactly what clarity is all about in terms of speech. Now the way we learnt pronunciation in our school itself is wrong. Say for example, this particular letter. Now this is a letter in English alphabet system. How do we pronounce this? It's pronounced as H. Okay. But in southern part of India, everybody pronounces this letter as H. It's not H, or let me make it this way. They say H. It's not H, it's H. Alright. Say for example the letter M. It's pronounced as M. But in southern India, everybody pronounces that as Yam. For example, N, and it's pronounced as Yen. There are more such examples. Say for example O. It's pronounced as O, but lot of people pronounce this as Wo. So they say Yam, Yen, Wo, P. It's not Yem, Yen, it's M, N, O. Likewise, this particular letter is H. Alright. Now when you mispronounce the letters itself, it can lead to mispronunciation of words also. Alright. Say for example, the word class, lot of people pronounce this as class. It's not class, it's class. So I have K, L, A, S, class. This is how it's pronounced. But people make a mistake and they make it O, class. Say for example, I have just a moment. I have the word which is page. Okay. Now the pronunciation is P, A, J, page. Correct? But lot of people replace the J with a Z, Z. Page. They say page number. What is the page number? It's not page, it is page. Alright. They sometimes interchange as well. For example, it's zone. Instead of saying zone, they pronounce this as zone. These are the pronunciation that you end up carrying because this is how you learnt in the school, right? So I cannot blame the students who are mispronouncing words. Even I was taught like that in school. Even I studied in government school, non-English medium school, but later I had to learn it for my job. So when you do not understand how a word is pronounced, the best way is to refer to the dictionary. Now that you have online dictionary available, you can just enter a word in Google, put on a headphone or switch on the speaker in your system and you can hear the pronunciation. So this pronunciation aspect is very important when we speak about clarity. In case if you make mistakes in terms of pronunciation, it can lead to a very different meaning. Sometimes these words have different pronunciation and it leads to a different meaning altogether. For example, content and content. These are two different words, but we interchange. Lot of times, lot of people use the word content, content. Please give me the training content. It's not training content, it's training content. So these are the areas where you make pronunciation mistakes in terms of certain sounds and that can lead to a completely different meaning. Okay. So the more you understand, the more you will discover where exactly you are going wrong, and my job or this training is to help you understand how to correct these mistakes. And that's why the importance of this communication skill is really high, because so that you can understand that what you have learned in the past is actually not correct and this is the right way of speaking and writing. Alright. And the last element of essentials of communication is listening skills. Listening skills is nothing but a step further of hearing. What we are hearing is just the sound because we have the ear, but listening is something more psychological. Listening is the next step of hearing. Hearing is just receiving the sound. Listening is receiving the sound, translating that into something which you can understand, and you respond to it. For example, if the phone is ringing, if my phone is beeping, if it's ringing, I'm hearing it. But when I'm answering, that means I'm listening to it and I'm responding to it. And there are different types of listening, there are different stages of listening. All these elements you will get to know in the next session whenever we have that scheduled, probably tomorrow. But please do a recap, rewind the YouTube session. Whatever questions you have and whatever you want to learn in terms of effective communication, feel free to post your question in the YouTube comment section. I'll take a look. I will announce the name of the person who's posing these questions and I will provide you with the answer. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in this morning. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.